The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and made every breath sound like thunder. A small black boy stood beside his trembling mother, her wrists bound in cold, silver handcuffs. The judge towered above them, robes flowing like shadows. The boy looked up and said, in a voice that cut through the air, "Let go of my mom. I'll make you stand." The room erupted in laughter. Lawyers smirked. Porters whispered. The judge chuckled under his breath. After all, everyone knew the truth. The man sitting in that chair hadn't stood on his own legs in over 6 years. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. The boy's name was Malik Carter, just 12 years old, with eyes too old for his age. His mother, Naomi, had been arrested for something she didn't do, accused of stealing from the very store where she cleaned floors every night. The evidence was thin, but the prejudice was thick. Naomi's lawyer barely looked at her. The prosecutor didn't even try to hide his smirk. Malik had watched it all, the whispers, the pointing fingers, the way people looked at his mother like she was less than human. But what they didn't know was that Malik had been born with something no one could measure. Not wealth, not power, but faith, and an unexplainable strength that came from somewhere deeper than flesh and bone. The judge, Howard Gaines, had been paralyzed from the waist down for years after a car accident. A man of law and logic, he didn't believe in miracles. So when Malik shouted those words, "I'll make you stand," he simply leaned back and said, "Then, young man, by all means, try." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Malik, don't," she whispered. "Please, baby, don't make it worse." But the boy stepped forward anyway. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady. "You all think my mom's guilty because we're poor, because we're black. But if I can make you stand, Judge, will you believe she's innocent?" A murmur swept through the courtroom. Even the bailiff hesitated. The judge hesitated, then nodded. "If you can make me stand," he said coldly, "I'll personally sign her release." Malik closed his eyes. The air seemed to grow heavier. Sunlight streaming through the windows flickered across his face. He whispered something under his breath. A prayer. A promise. No one could quite hear. Then something shifted. The judge's fingers twitched. His breathing quickened. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair as though pulled by invisible strings. The laughter stopped. Gasps filled the room as his feet that had moved in years, began to stir. The courtroom froze. The sound of metal wheels creaked as the judge tried, then pushed, then rose. His robe trembled. His face turned pale. But he was standing. People screamed. Some prayed. Others ran for their phones. But Malik didn't move. He just stared at the judge, tears sliding down his cheeks. "Now, will you believe her?"
Ow.
he whispered. Judge Gaines looked down at his trembling legs, then at the woman who had been chained before him. He couldn't speak. His voice caught between disbelief and awe. Slowly, he nodded to the bailiff. "Remove her cuffs." Naomi collapsed into Malik's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The judge stumbled, still finding his balance, and whispered, "What did you do?" Malik simply said. "I asked God to show you what justice looks like when it finally stands up." The courtroom, moments ago full of mockery, fell to its knees in silence. The same people who had laughed at him now watched in reverence. Some wept. Some couldn't look away. But miracles have a way of revealing more than just power. They expose truth. Within hours, new evidence surfaced. Security footage showing another employee stealing from the store. Naomi's name was cleared. Prosecutor resigned in shame, and Judge Gaines never used his wheelchair again. Weeks later, the judge visited their small apartment in the old part of town. He came without cameras, without reporters, just a humble man changed by what he couldn't explain. He handed Naomi an envelope. Inside was a full pardon and a college scholarship for Malik. "I owe you both something I can never repay," he said quietly. "You made me stand. It's not just on my feet, but for what's right." Malik smiled shyly. "Then maybe that's the point, sir. You stood so others could too." Years later, Malik Carter would become a civil rights attorney, fighting for those who didn't have a voice. On the day of his first major trial, Judge Gaines sat in the front row, watching with pride. He stood when Malik entered the courtroom, just as he had promised he always would, because sometimes miracles don't happen to prove power. They happen to prove justice. because faith doesn't just move mountains, it teaches them how to stand. And in a world quick to judge, one boy's courage reminded everyone that truth, when it rises, can't be chained. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. And tell me in the comments, do you still believe in miracles? Because maybe they believe in you.